My name is Andrew Hurie, and the title of my presentation today is The Elusive Quest for Educational Equity in a 1.5-Way Dual Language Program. I'd like to begin by thanking AAAL and the graduate committee who recognized this work in which many people have taken part and participated. So thank you very much. I'd like to begin by kind of discussing this framing of bilingual education programs in terms of one way and two way, where one way is used to refer to a supposedly homogeneous group of language speakers, traditionally Spanish language speakers, and they were in a bilingual program acquiring English and developing biliteracy, bilingualism in their native language, right? And then there's this framing of two-way dual language programs, which are supposedly programs that mix two groups of students from distinct language backgrounds. So oftentimes those are framed as programs that have equal numbers of Spanish dominant students and English dominant students. And, oftentimes those programs are framed within this Latinx Anglo binary. And because of the kind of problematic framing and the ways that these labels don't quite recognize the dynamic language use that multilingual students bring to their school, their formal schooling, Nelson Flores has suggested a typology, and one of the labels that he uses is 1.5-way dual language programs. And he describes these as programs that are located in segregated neighborhoods, but also that they're characterized by minoritized languaging across generations. And so my study looks at one of these programs within the context of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. For my dissertation project, I wanted to return to Milwaukee, the city where I worked for 9 years as a teacher assistant and bilingual teacher, and lastly as a school administrator. And so my 9-month critical ethnography looked at the tensions and intersections between bilingual education and school choice, focusing on one public dual language school with a dual language program, and it served a high concentration of Latinx identified students, around 97%. So this presentation draws from data from that study, and specifically I'm interested in how teachers theorized educational equity at that school. So research methods for this presentation included semi-structured interviews with 3 bilingual teachers. I engaged in member checking as well. In order to make sense of the bilingual teachers' theorizations, I also draw from certain theoretical constructs. One is W.E.B. Du Bois' concept of the color line, which both names the geographical aspects of racial segregation, as well as kind of these ontological delineations of whiteness. And other scholars like Charles Mills and Zeus Leonardo have kind of talked about this global color line. I also draw on the construct of history in person, or her story in person, theorized by Holland and Lave. And they discussed the kind of local contentious practice as the way that individuals engage in identity formation, as well as the making and remaking and contestation of structures that have endured, and in this case, enduring oppressions and struggles around race and class. So in this chart, you can see the 3 participating teachers, Ms. Alfaro, Ms. Townsend, and Ms. Arguera. And I selected them because of their different perspectives around educational equity, their different identifications and teaching experiences and language practices. Ms. Alfaro was a veteran teacher, energetic. She had wonderful connections with her students, and she was always planning projects with them. She denounced the segregation that characterizes Milwaukee and makes it often appear at the top of the lists of the most segregated cities in the US. And she also explained kind of this ethical commitment to teaching, which she said, and you can follow along with the translation. Voy a vivir en el área que yo enseño, porque es la única manera que yo puedo entender a los estudiantes. So she lived on the near south side where this school was located. And she also explained, yo no me veo viviendo en Mequon, en River Hills, en ninguna de esas áreas. Son hermosas las casas, está lindísima la tierra por ahí, pero no es para mí. Y con eso, la población también no es para mí. So she names two predominantly white, affluent suburbs and says specifically that the population, the student population, is not for her, right? And she discussed this in relation to different job offers that she had, one of which was to start a two-way dual language program in one of these suburban schools. And she refused that. So in her conception of ethical teaching, it could be seen as this transgression, right? This refusal to follow this trajectory towards whiteness. Miss Townsend was a patient teacher. She had projects for her students, and she had this very keen focus on them. They were certainly the priority. I could see she was very passionate about her teaching practice. And when I sat down with her and asked her about the benefits of bilingualism, she listed some benefits, and I asked her if she really believed in those. And she said, I'm not the most passionate about that in terms of the education world in the United States, but I do believe in it. I think it's great, speaking about bilingual education. And so then I asked her, what she meant by that. And she said, if I were to choose one issue to stand behind, it would be inequity related to the divide between black and white students, because I am black and white. And so I kind of have some personal ties to that. I wanted to become a teacher for social justice. And so the justice that I want to see all justice, but the justice I feel like my heart aches for is, reaching the black students in the United States or in Milwaukee or wherever. Miss Townsend's words demonstrate this very acute political clarity, right? And she recognized the importance of social justice writ large, but she is also very committed to racial justice for black students. She was very aware of the history of inequities in the United States around black students' education. And her words also construct bilingual education as discursively non-black. And I think that in these times when we are acutely aware as a nation of the police brutality, of the anti-black state-sanctioned violence that has existed since the founding of the nation, her critique of bilingual education becomes even more important. Miss Argueda was an activist. She was highly engaged in the school community and the broader community. She volunteered in a pro-immigrant rights organization. And she was an activist teacher, based on her own experiences growing up as a student identified for ESL and some of the kind of racist positionings of her teachers and other students. So she saw bilingual education as a definite part of educational equity. And then she said, it saddens me that there's charter schools who hone in on that Latino realm, yet they don't have bilingual classes. then she kind of offered this critique of strict separation of languages that is commonplace in a lot of bilingual programs. So she said, there are some students who mess it up. I mean, I mess it up. I speak Spanglish, and that's a tongue itself. It's a language, a linguistic phenomenon, but it gets dismissed all the time saying it's slang. It's not real. It's not a proper way of speaking. So Ms. Argueda, in addition to recognizing bilingual education as part of a project of educational equity, she also recognizes that there are certain framings of bilingual education, officialized framings. In terms of the discussion and implications of this work, the participants realized and advocated that an overhaul of the system was necessary. They recognized structural issues, and they weren't promoting simplistic solutions, right? They had this nuanced analysis and very scathing critiques of segregation, of school privatization, and these systems of inequity that were very much materially based. And so they refused this narrative that education and only education was the answer, or that there were some simplistic solutions to these very entrenched and enduring struggles around race and class. At the same time, their commitments to teaching, whether that was Miss Alfaro's decision to teach at this school, or Miss Townsend's presence as a biracial black and white teacher in a bilingual classroom, or Miss Argueda's enunciation of dynamic languaging and embrace of her students' dynamic language practices, their own praxis as bilingual teachers was part of this enduring quest for educational justice. The participants theorized different layers of inequalities, and so one could be seen as the classroom, one could be seen as the city, and another could be seen as the region, the greater Milwaukee region. So in the classroom, dynamic languaging and Spanish as identity formation would take place against these white supremacist delineations of the human. So that classroom intervention and the educational practice on a daily basis was part of this idea of educational equity. At the same time, there was this broader layer of the city. And so Ms. Argueda spoke against the English medium orientation of charter schools, and Ms. Townsend reminded us that anti-Blackness must be contested within bilingual bicultural education. Lastly, Ms. Argueda reminded us of the great material inequities between affluent suburbs and the city of Milwaukee. And so she announced and denounced this history of white supremacist structuring of space around redlining and racially restrictive covenants. And so really her critique demands this redistribution of resources from affluent suburbs to the city, somewhat akin with regional equity approaches announced by Holm and Finnegan. So thank you for your interest in this presentation. You can see my email on the screen. So please, any questions or comments that you have, I would welcome them. And thank you again.